One of the challenges of doing these commentaries is choosing the subject matter from the wealth of material that's available. For example, I wake up this morning and John Bolton is the National Security Advisor in the United States. Now that's obviously a travesty. The man is such a right-wing throwback that he belongs in a museum. When he was the ambassador to the United Nations, he was considered the ambassador of bombast. But he's not just a hawk, he has morphed into a war-mongering beast. To think of Donald Trump and John Bolton together in the White House takes us much closer to a war, whether it's with Iran or Iraq or North Korea. Or I might have chosen the fact that the United Nations today is dealing with the World Water Decade, working water into the Sustainable Development Goals. And you know, just last week there was a fascinating report called Making Every Drop Count, put out by an eminent panel of presidents and prime ministers, pointing out that by the year 2030, we could have, are likely to have, a 40% shortfall in water around the world. Now just imagine the possibility of conflict. Or I might have chosen tomorrow being March 24th, which is World Tuberculosis Day, and we now know that tuberculosis is the greatest single infectious disease killer on the planet. And every day there's another story about TB now. In fact, today in Canada, a story of a 14-year-old Inuit indigenous boy who died of tuberculosis last week. No one should die of tuberculosis in a country like Canada. And the story also pointed out that the levels of tuberculosis in the northern Arctic indigenous Inuit territory are 300 times the level of tuberculosis in the non-indigenous population. Now, fortunately, we have a Minister of Health in Canada who will do something about it, unlike the previous 10 years of a Conservative regime where the attitudes were rather explicit racism than public health. But of course, when dealing with an infectious disease like tuberculosis, I'm immediately reminded of an astonishing article in The Guardian last week, written by Jonathan Quick, pointing out that there's another pandemic in the offing at some point soon, and we're really unprepared for it. It's rather like living in California and waiting for the next earthquake. And whether it's AIDS or Ebola or Zika or the SARS epidemic of some years ago, there is coming a moment in time where, whether it's a pathogen or a virus, will move from the animal population to the human population and result in a real calamity. In fact, Jonathan Quick points out that Bill Gates is funding a modeling exercise on what might happen in the next pandemic, which suggests that if worst comes to the worst, 33 million people could die in just over 200 days. Or I might have dealt with the report, which was largely unreported last week, on sexual violence during the course of the Syrian war. And honestly, the elements of depravity in the narrative are unlike anything I have read in a UN report for years. But I don't want to end on that calamitous and sordid note. Let me look for some kind of reductio ad absurdum, and it's not hard to find. The war of words between the former Vice President Joe Biden and the current President Donald Trump, where they want to take each other out behind the school, behind the gym, and beat each other up with fisticuffs. Honest to God, it's the language of 6-year-olds. Well, maybe that's not fair to 6-year-olds. That was last week. I'm Stephen Lewis.